Hi, welcome to Unit 3 2.4 Key Influences on a Trial Outcome. This is worth 10 marks, so it's really important that you do this section well. There are, I think, 7 different influences you can talk about. It's worth having all of them prepared. Some of them you will do in more detail than others, but I think what you need to think about is what is going to really impact on the jury. Okay, in a Crown Court case, it's the jury that makes up their minds, and they're basically given 2 versions of events, aren't they? They're given the version by the prosecution, who is there to represent the police and the victim of the crime. So they are telling one story about what's happened, and they want to find the defendant guilty. But equally, the defence team is there to represent the interests of the defendant, and they are going to be telling a very different type of story to explain why it isn't beyond reasonable doubt to conclude that their defendant is in fact innocent of the crime. So when you are doing this section, you have to think like that. Okay, what is going to influence the outcome? Okay, so it's worth taking your way through each of these. So for example, when you talk about evidence, the impact of evidence is obviously going to be massive, but are there different types of evidence which have an impact? So for example, juries tend to like to see physical evidence, DNA. They've all watched CSI on the telly and they think it's going to be like that. So that the strength of physical evidence can be massive. Okay. Equally, if evidence is really complicated, say for example it's a fraud case, some sort of white collar crime case, the more complex the evidence, it might have an adverse effect. They don't understand it, therefore they don't feel sure about finding someone guilty. Okay. You could also talk about the strengths and weaknesses of testimonial evidence. For example, I think you look at the case of Vincent Tabak, who was guilty of killing Joe Yates, and he gave a devastating testimony on the stand, and so therefore that's going to have a massive impact on the jury. Equally, if you're talking about witnesses, you need to be aware that if a witness is over emotional, that may not necessarily be a good thing when the jury are making up their minds. So again, how truthful is a witness? How do they come across? They come across as confident. How do they stand up to the sort of the cross-examination that they get from perhaps a bullying barrister? You have to weigh up all those sorts of examples, and if you can give true life examples in criminal cases, that is worth doing. Equally, when you come to witness experts, then you've got lots of examples. The classic being Sir Roy Meadows in the case of Sally Clark and the other women accused of killing their children. They're going to have a huge amount of influence over jury from the point of view that they are the so-called experts in an area. Their evidence is going to carry weight. Okay, so again, use those examples. Now, don't feel you have to completely re-explain what Sir Roy Meadows said and what the impact it had on the Sally Clark case, but it is worth just mentioning briefly that example. The strength of barristers and legal teams, again, there may not be a huge amount to write here, but there may be certain charismatic barristers that, again, very much showboat in court, and again, that might sway a jury one way or the other. The influence of the judiciary, it is worth finding out the background of the judiciary in terms of Crown Court judges, High Court judges. They come from a very elite background, and again, maybe some of their assumptions and some of their summings up may have an impact. You might want to consider the case of Clive Ponting, who was up for breaking the Official Secrets Act over something called the Belgrano affair, and the judge pretty much told the jury to find him guilty because he had broken the law. The jury took absolutely no notice of him. So the judge did try to influence the outcome of the trial there. Politics, that's probably less to write there, but certainly the views of politicians of the day, the right wing who want to perhaps have stricter rules and laws and stricter punishments may have an impact, particularly over certain things like, say, rioting or crimes that seem to impact against the state. And finally, the media. There's an awful lot to write there in terms of media influences, and you may want to sort of consider the law there in terms of how a jury is supposed to avoid using social media. They're supposed to avoid looking at newspapers and TV reports on the news. They're not really supposed to know what's going on outside of the courtroom. The media equally has to be hugely responsible in the way that it reports cases, and certainly it can reveal all the facts once somebody has been found guilty, but in the run-up and during the trial they have to keep very quiet about certain facts. So for example, if you remember the recent dreadful killing of children in Sheffield at the hands of the mother and the boyfriend, it was kept quiet that in fact the mother and the boyfriend were in an incestuous relationship, because that would have had a massive negative impact on the jury had they known that these two adults were in an illegal sexual relationship and having produced these children via incest. So that would have had a massive negative impact, and so the media, had to keep quiet about that. Okay. So it's a long write-up, but again, I don't think it's too difficult to get a really good score on this. So good luck.